Welcome. Happy Wednesday. It is February 7th. I am so excited for tonight. Callie, tonight it's 11
I was
a.m.
wondering, is this playing live or tonight?
What's happening, Liz? Yeah, exactly. So excited for today. Sorry. Today, Callie Werner is on with us, and Chris Johnson will be on shortly. He's running a little bit late, but he'll be here. But I'm really excited. Today, we're going to focus a lot on treatment updates, accountability, and OCD treatment. But I'm actually going to do a switch. And I want us today to focus on the language that we use in recovery. So all three of us, when Chris joins, I know there's two of us now, are, whoa, sorry. Hold on, guys. Oh, goodness. All three of us are individuals who have lived experience with OCD who are also now clinicians. And I've been doing a lot in my posts and talking a lot lately about how the language that we use really impacts both our treatment outcomes, but our understanding of treatment, what we can hope for, and how individuals from the outside understand and conceptualize OCD and OCD treatment. And so I want us to spend a lot of time focusing on that today and talking a little bit about what you and I talked about last week, Callie, of just like, what is kind of the difference and how do we see that shift? What can we expect? What does it look for? So I'll intro all that. We'll get into that shortly. But for now, a little bit of a quick introduction. Thank y'all for joining. As you guys know, this is our Lunch and Learn that's held every Wednesday at noon Eastern. Of course, the second Wednesday next week is a research roundtable with Dr. Bernwitz and Kyle King. Otherwise, y'all will see us here Wednesdays at noon Eastern. This live stream is not intended to replace therapy. Instead, it's really intended to be educational, supportive, and hopefully lead you to the right resources, to ask the right questions, to do the things you need to do to get you on a path to recovery that you're working with individually with your clinician. We are not here to replace your clinician, but instead are here to provide education, support, and hopefully some helpful tools. So today we are joined by both Chris, myself, and Callie Werner. Callie is one of my great friends. We've worked together for a long time and have been doing this work. I don't even know how many years now, Callie, but I would love for you to spend a little bit of time just introducing yourself, what you do. I know you've been on some live streams before, but tell the community who you are and why you love this work.
Yeah, I started out as Liz's grad assistant in my master's program. So just a baby at that time. Well, we both were, but I knew that I wanted to work with OCD once I got diagnosed and got treatment that changed my life, because I had struggled with it my whole life and it really was life-changing. And so I now realized at the time that I was struggling with a lot of compulsions around competing as a Division I athlete, and really love that connection between sport performance and mental health. And so I feel like that's my niche area to work on, providing way more research than there already is. And so that's what I'm most passionate about. But obviously just helping with continuity of care and providing support for those, hopefully earlier than I've gotten it myself. And we've seen the research and treatment come a long way, but it's still got a long way to go. And so hoping to continue filling that gap, but really excited to be here with you both.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited. And Chris, I was just saying when you were hopping on that I really want today to focus on the language, the shifts in language, the shifts in our understanding about treatment and where it can take you, and why we're doing that. And this got brought up for me recently. I was talking with somebody who actually was able to say to me, hey, Liz, I've seen your own platform and the way you talk about treatment shift. And as I really reflected, there was decade plus of my life where I identified as somebody who suffers with OCD. And I really did believe that the best I would get is to be functional with my OCD. I thought that, well, if I can function while struggling, that is good, right? That is a good outcome. Like that's what I should expect. And that's what I should be fighting for every day, is like fighting to be able to function. And so before we hop into the transition or the language shift that has happened for a lot of us, I would love to hear a little bit about what that was like for you. And did y'all remember, were y'all ever in a phase where you kind of thought that that was treatment for you, or that that's what would be a successful outcome? Callie, why don't you take it first, then Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I still thought that probably just a few years ago, because I would say I was at a place where I was doing really well, right? We always talk about like that 70 to 80%, you're doing great. You don't notice as much OCD. I've done a lot of ERP myself, but there was still that bit that I was holding on to I was able to really keep hush, because it only would come up around times I would compete. And in college, I was competing every weekend. And so it was so abrupt. But at this point, I mean, I was only competing once every 4 or 5 months, and was really able to thrive unless that competition came up, and I would still hide some of these compulsions. And so it wasn't until I had a really big race that made a lot of those compulsions surface over the course of 2 weeks. And I realized, wow, I tell my patients all the time that you can experience freedom, but here I am not experiencing it myself. And that's because I was still engaging in some of these things that were feeding the OCD long term. And so I think I was a little bit discouraged by that, but held on to this hope that it didn't have to be that way. And I feel like we can tell everyone all the time that you can have freedom from OCD, but until you take that leap, you don't really fully believe it. And so I still didn't fully believe it. I was like, I'm going to live in the 90% because that's what freedom from OCD is. But I found the courage and accountability, I will say, in therapy to really let go of those final compulsions and got what freedom is supposed to be. And that doesn't mean I don't ever get triggered, but it does mean that I'm able to live a life with OCD rarely surfacing, me not living in fear of another trigger. I think that's the huge part of freedom, right? It's just not living in fear of knowing, yeah, you might get triggered, but you know how to handle it. And so, yeah, that's been my experience, but had to get through that groundbreaking moment where I had to lay it all on the line. And I'm so glad that I did.
I love
I
it.
think
Chris,
for
what about
me,
you?
yeah, no, I think for me is I would say first what I've seen is just the conversation around freedom and getting better and everything kind of start to shift in the whole community as a whole. I mean, I know when I went through treatment, no, luckily my therapist never told me it was a chronic disorder, because I think I would have probably never gone as hard in treatment as I could, because I would just assume like, well, if it's chronic, what's the point of like going hard if this is going to be with me forever? So it wasn't until I started getting into the community after treatment, where I was still working on things, that I kept hearing that, and it just felt very doom or gloom, you know. And I think everybody was well intentioned, but it came across as like, well, you know, it's better after treatment, but you'll have it forever and chronic. And so I think I kind of like got into that mode for a while. And then as I became an advocate and became a therapist and working with people, same as you were saying, Liz and Callie as well, I'm like, wait a second, like I can't promise people that they're going to be able to do amazing things and then holding myself back. And so I think for me, it was a shift in my own recovery where I was just like, I need to go hard. I don't know if you both can relate. I think another thing is I didn't even realize a lot of things I was doing was OCD. I didn't ever kind of recognize that until it was sort of like I started to notice a lot of my maladaptive patterns had started from OCD, and I was sort of just keeping them going. So a big part of it was definitely like taking accountability for my own treatment, right? Like I'm like, I have to start to push harder on things and continue to experience freedom. So an example is like flying to London and speaking at a conference. Like, I don't know why I never did it, but I realized that all these fears of my luggage getting lost, and what if I can't sleep well, and what if I bomb on stage because I'm so, you know, sleep deprived. And then I was like, wait a second, I'm going to just say yes. And I went, right? So I think that's a big part, is continuing to push yourself and expand your comfort zone beyond what you think is imaginable.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that again, you know, Callie, we talked about this last week, and I was kind of saying like, what is it that allows patients to actually believe that freedom is possible versus they're like, oh yeah, Liz talks about that, but that's not really real. Like what's real for me is functioning. And Callie and I kind of talked about, want to introduce one of our own theories that is not backed by research, but it's just a theory. Is we talked a little bit, Callie, about how it feels like there's this like initial ERP burst. I call it like the 70%, right? Where you do ERP and you get 70% of your life back. And it's incredible, right? You're like, holy crap, I'm able to do these things I couldn't do. I can go to dinner with my friends. I can see my family. I can go to school. I can hold a job. And like that 70% feels miraculous, right? It really does. And it is, candidly, it's really incredible. But then over time, that 30% that you're holding on to starts to weigh you down and starts to feel exhausting and awful. And you're not excited about the 70%. You're like, why is this at 30% still here? Like, I have to get rid of that. And that is when that second piece of work really happens, where people, in my opinion, you go to functioning and then you realize I need to do that last 30% to get to freedom. And Callie, I want you to introduce what you told me last week of like what you think it is in between.
Yeah. And I feel like someone can't get to that 100% in residential or intensive care because they have to live their life to let that last 30% come in, right? Like there's only so many exposures and experiences you can do in that intensive setting or even in just your treatment with your therapist, but you have to live that ERP lifestyle almost, right? Of like allowing yourself to do things that will get you triggered and then making a choice. And when you make that choice to fight against OCD, not giving it everything that it wants, that's when you find that last 30%.
Yeah, I love it. It's, that key part is like living life, right? It's like we can do all the treatment we can do and that we want to do, but if you don't actually go live your life, there's not that same motivating piece either to say, oh, I need to do that remaining 30%, right? It's like, well, this is good enough. But when you go start living your life, which now you can do because of the original treatment, right? Before you couldn't live your life because OCD was 100%. So now when it's 30, you can go live your life. And then when you start living your life, you're like, man, I don't like that OCD is showing up on my dates. I don't like that OCD shows up, even though it's smaller and I can still do it. I don't like that it's there at all. And now, boom, you're able to do the remaining work to get to freedom, right? So I'm introducing this like treatment concept that's just called living life and how critical it is of like, it's like treatment, you live your life, then you can get to freedom, right? It's kind of hard to go from like just struggling treatment to freedom because there's that in between. Chris, talk about it. Tell me your thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's funny because I was like, okay, I don't want to step in on like, I was trying to decide, is this like what we call it, like the Caliz concept, or is it going to be more the Lil Ali? I was like trying to figure out like
I love
Lil Ali, Chris.
But then I was like, if I add something to it, can it be like, can we somehow incorporate?
Lil Ali.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it goes back to like conversations. I mean, I wish sometimes Liz and I could just like secretly record our conversations and play them for you, because I think this is a lot of brainstorming we do. And I think one of the big mistakes in very manualized treatment is there's this idea that it's like, okay, your Y-box score is to a certain number, like go now. And I think that's what you both are talking about, that like 70%. It's really difficult for someone to leave treatment, be at that 70%, and then somehow like embrace freedom, right? So what we're all talking about is like part of treatment, and I don't think my clients always see it as treatment. I do, is like part of treatment is like, oh, you want to go to cosmetology school? Awesome. Stuff's going to pop up. And we love that. Now you get real life exposures versus the ones we were doing in treatment. Oh, you want to start dating? Let's create a dating app. Let's start swiping right? Like, let's get you on dates. There's going to be new triggers as you enter new arenas, but that's what's so awesome. And then what ends up happening, it reminds me a lot, Liz, about our conversation with Michael Wheaton. It's like the brain wants new memories and they want new positive memories. So going on dates, you're not going to sit there and run to the bathroom and do an hour of compulsions because you're trying to impress this girl, right? So you start to put some of these other things that you're engaging in as more important than the OCD. And you start to teach yourself, because the treatment's a teaching tool, that OCD is no longer as important as engaging in things that I really, really enjoy. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I love that, Chris, because I think that was a big breakthrough moment for me when I realized, wait, I can have that OCD thought that I've been stuck on for however many years, and I can go to this fun event with my friends and play beach volleyball and like forget about it for a little while. Wow, like that's evidence right there that I could probably do a little bit more of this, right? And then you buy into creating more of those life experiences, and OCD just slowly becomes smaller.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I want us to think a little bit about this in the sense that I also want us to talk now about language. And I want us to talk a little bit about language that may dampen this opportunity to get to freedom. And one language I see a lot is when people will say, well, I can't work right now, or I can't go back to school, or family members will say they're not capable of going to school right now. And my answer is always like, what, why? So I want to talk about that for a little bit, just because, again, if we really feel like that middle piece is living life, it doesn't mean living a limited life. Like, you didn't see us say treatment, live a limited life, then you get to freedom. What we're saying is you have to live a full life so that you can see the things that you really, really want, that you know you need to address OCD to be able to fully get there. So can y'all talk a little bit about that, of like, what's the difference of like limiting our life and the way that then it actually keeps us holding on to that 30% versus how do we actually like live and immerse ourselves in life so that it makes that 30% something we're not willing to hold on to?
Yeah, I think it's about, what are you still holding on, like control wise, right? Like, what are you still controlling in your environment? And if you're just if any of us are fully controlling, fully structuring our environment, there's no room for experience or spontaneous memories or excitement that you weren't expecting. And so you can't live your whole life that way. But when you live in a place with treatment of OCD and you're not engaging in experience and life, then that's taking away that 30% from you. And so it's about letting go of that bit of control for some of that spontaneity and letting there be moments where you might get triggered unexpectedly, but that's where the most growth happens. Because most of us that have gone through some form of more intensive treatment have gotten really good at doing the planned exposures, at doing things in this confined environment where we know we have control. But you have to also get good at the unplanned exposures, because that's not how life works.
I would add to what you were saying, Liz, too. And I know we've talked about it before, like on live streams, when someone's asked, like, should my kid go back to school or not? I think what happens is, like, when somebody's at their worst, both that person starts to lose faith in the fact that they can get back to a point where they're living their life to its fullest. And then family members and loved ones and people around them start to treat them that way as well. And so as the person's going through treatment, I think what we're all doing as clinicians is seeing the strength in our clients and saying, look, you have a certain set of skills that is going to navigate you through the depths of OCD. And then we're going to kind of put you back into the position where you were prior to the OCD hitting, but even better. John Grayson always talks about that. And how can we move you forward? And I think sometimes, unfortunately, a client and the family members almost kind of lose confidence, not in the person, but just that can be possible. And so then it is a lot of like, hey, what if my, kid doesn't go to school this semester? Or, we were going to move or go on vacation, but we think it might be too hard for her. And then that person kind of loses faith in themselves as well. So I think as clinicians, in addition to everything we've been talking about, it's really starting to instill that strength back into the client so that they don't kind of live this muted lifestyle out of fear.
I went to like caption that, don't live a muted lifestyle out of fear, right? We had a patient here once who said, I don't want to live a half life because of my OCD. And I loved it. And it's just, and so we say that because, like, if you are setting yourself up for, because I have OCD, I can't do this, or I can't do that, or you can't give me those expectations, or you can't give me those responsibilities. What message are we sending you guys, right? I want us to think about that. Are we fragilizing ourselves, and are we sending this message that, I can't tolerate that, I can't do it? Or are we sending this message that's like, hey, treat me the same as you would treat my sibling who didn't have OCD. Like, give me all the things, give me those responsibilities. I'm capable. You would be shocked at how many times we hear patients and kids say, like, I struggle that my parents don't have faith that, like, they don't give me the same responsibilities. They don't think I'm capable of doing it. And so I say that because your child wants to be treated as though they are fully capable individual, not treated differently because of their anxiety and OCD. And when we start treating them differently, the message that we're sending is, your anxiety is dangerous. Your anxiety kind of narrows or like stunts your capabilities and your growth. And that's the opposite of the message I think we all know we want to send.
Yeah. OCD makes you also just doubt your ability to trust yourself, right? Whether it be trusting your hands are clean, trusting that you didn't do something wrong. And in order to gain that trust back, you have to have responsibilities and almost like prove to yourself that I can live a full life. And it's by trying to live a full life that you are able to get that trust.
Totally. Exactly.
Yeah, and what just like you were saying, Callie, I think two things happen in treatment or prior to treatment, rather. I think one is somebody trusts their abilities and being able to handle difficult situations, and then second of all, there's a constant state of fear. That's pretty much if somebody doesn't have OCD, that's the best way I can ever describe it. Is somebody with OCD is in constant state of fear that things potentially could go wrong, and so through the treatment, that's what I always remind people is like, and what we saw in our live stream with inhibitory learning is like the treatment is teaching you something. There is cognitive work in ERP. People are learning to both trust themselves, that the world isn't as dangerous, and that they can manage difficult situations. I think if our community, if whether it's clinicians or advocates, I think if the family members and then the patient themselves instead is thinking like, I got to kind of white knuckle through life, there's going to be certain things that are off limits for me. That makes me sad because I think of you two and myself, and I know the things that we engage in life. You know, Liz has the most amazing two little girls. I finally got your Christmas card this year, Liz. I don't know what happened the other years, but adorable family. Like Callie, you are way more in shape than I'll ever dream to be and just doing amazing things. And so when I hear clients that are kind of just like coasting, I'm like, no, it could be better than that. And that's the message we have to put out there.
And I will tell y'all, like, you know, as somebody, I've been doing this work now for 2 decades. My parents still don't send the right message. Like, I will hear my parents when they talk about my OCD, they'll say things like, well, that's Liz's struggle. Like, we know even when she's doing great, she's still struggling. And I'm like, what? Like, I know that was the old language, because that's what I believed and thought. And so as a family, we all, like, that's how we saw my anxiety or my OCD, where now I'm like, no, like, don't say that. Like, don't, you know. And I always do tell people I'm grateful that my parents set really clear boundaries with me, even in the midst of treatment. You know, they were very clear that like, you have to be in full-time school or you have to be working full-time. Like, we're not going to let you answer to your illness and have your illness define you, you know. But I think language is so important. You know, John Grayson was really like the founder of really talking outspoken a lot about language. Like, not like if somebody says I have to wash my hands, he'll say, nope, I need you to recorrect that and say, I'm choosing to wash my hands.
Yeah.
For many of us with OCD, that actually feels really hard because it feels unvalidating at times, right? So I will even tell my patients, hey, what I'm about to say might feel really unvalidating and it might not feel good, but I want you to know that I'm saying this because I care about you and I don't care about your OCD. Mm-hmm. And so I'll say things like, hey, I need you to start using language that sends the message to OCD that you have a choice and that OCD isn't something that you have no control over. And I think, guys, that's a big shift. A lot of people with OCD, we like want to believe that we can't control it. We don't choose it. It's not our fault. And some of that is very true. Like, it isn't our fault. We were born with this. We didn't choose it. But actually, like, we can make choices that will either disempower OCD and give us all the control, or continue to make choices that empowers OCD and give it all the control. And I'm curious for you what that switch was. Because I know for me, when my language and understanding of potential treatment outcomes and having freedom versus just functioning, a lot of that for me was when I took more ownership over saying like, actually, I am making choices that are making this bigger, instead of, oh, this is happening to me, it's not my fault. What do y'all think? And please tell me if you disagree too.
No, I agree. And I think I had 2 aha moments that I'll share. And I shared one of them on the live stream before, but the first was, there was still this false memory that I had played with for such a long time, probably 5 years. And obviously know where that gets you when it's an OCD compulsion, only more uncertain, more unclear, more anxious. And I just decided that I wasn't going to mess with it that day. And I was going to drive down the road and listen to a podcast. And I was going to call a friend and talk and do the things that I needed to do fully. And it didn't mean that the thought didn't come up, but I just said, I'm going to try not to solve it today. And it wasn't until like 3 or 4 days later where I realized, wow, I really haven't thought of that thought as much. And you start to get more clarity on that thought being OCD than you ever did before, right? Before I was like, well, what if this isn't my OCD? What if this is really this terrible, hard thing? And I was debilitated by it. And so I loved that I could see for the first time that, wow, I've got more clarity than ever by not trying to get clarity. That's probably the first piece. And then the second piece is the difference between a part of the language that I think will always exist in OCD work is uncertainty and certainty, right? And there were times where I could not for the life of me do exposures, but it was because I was accepting certainty. So I was telling myself that you definitely did this horrible thing, or this is definitely safe, or you're definitely a good person. When in reality, I needed it to be okay with not knowing in that moment. Because if I went to that worst case scenario and accepted that as true, I just got depressed. And if I went to that best case scenario, it just became reassurance. And so living in that middle zone of not knowing actually gave me the ability to know. And so, yeah, those were the two aha moments that led me to, oh, and you can experience true 100% freedom.
I think for me, a quick note on language, like an example of language that I do with my clients is I constantly will ask them, like, how is the OCD going today? Because a lot of times my clients will say my OCD. And I'm like, I don't hear my friends saying my cancer. I don't hear people saying like my fibromyalgia. They don't own it like we seem to own the OCD. So I always try to work on that with clients. Like, how can we separate it? Or I'm noticing I'm having a thought that I left the lights on versus like I left the lights on, or whatever it is that, you know, that they're fixating on. So trying to continue to separate them from it. I mean, it's funny because I have two kind of aha moments like you, Callie. One of them is so cheesy, and I'm Team Britney, so it embarrasses me that Justin Timberlake had like a piece in my recovery. But no, I mean, I remember as everybody knows, I'm a talker. And I mean, it's crazy because I think back to when I was at my worst and I was housebound and isolated. I mean, there'd be days where I didn't talk to another human being. And I remember there was a thing on MTV about Justin Timberlake, and he's older than me, but he was closest to a peer I had. Because at that point, I didn't really been around people my age for like 3 or 4 years. And I remember him like on the set of a music video and thinking like, here's this guy just living his best life. I don't want to be a singer. If you heard me sing at karaoke, you don't want me to be a singer. I don't want to be an actor. I don't want to be famous. But I was like, I just want to live like he's living. I hate that I am so stuck in my head all the time. I hate that I'm doing these hours of rituals. And because I knew what the diagnosis was, I started to get to a point of ownership. Like, I'm choosing to go up the stairs and wash my hands 100 times right now. Like, nobody's putting a gun to my head. Nobody's catering, forcing me to do that. And so once I started to realize like I had power and could push back, I think that was the first really shift in my treatment. And then I'd say lastly, what we're kind of talking about is like my mom, really kind of started to switch it and was like, Chris, like, we're not going to baby you anymore. If you don't show up, because I used to be, oh, great, Liz is going to roll her eyes. So when we'd have Greek food at my family's events.
Greek events, when I'm Greek, in case you didn't know.
Well, I love, I'm obsessed with Greek food. And so at holiday events, right, like we would start, in our culture, we start things early, like 1 o'clock for dinner, and you just eat the whole day. And like my whole family would sit around and wait for me to get there at 8 at night because I was late because of compulsions, and heat food up. And finally, my mom's like, look, we're not doing it anymore. We're going to start eating right at 1. If you don't show up on time, hopefully there'll be leftovers and we can microwave stuff. After one time of showing up.
When you can microwave stuff, not we.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
They wouldn't even do it for me, right? So the first time I showed up and there was no pasitio or spanakopita or lamb, I was like, oh, this is miserable. Like, I need to get my butt here. And so it taught me my responsibility. That doesn't mean, and I don't want anyone to hear that we think it's your fault that you have OCD. That is quite not the truth, but we do have control how we manage it and our relationship with it.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's about this radical acceptance of like, okay, yes, like I was diagnosed with OCD and there's incredible treatment available for me that makes it to where OCD doesn't have to have power in my life anymore. And I want to be really clear that none of us are on here saying that's easy. Like, we're not saying the treatment process is easy. We're not saying OCD is fun. We're not saying, oh, just deal with it. Like, we're talking about with effective treatment, you should be able to learn the tools to where you can see and recognize that these are choices and that I can choose to do something different and that I have the choice of the power OCD and anxiety is going to have in my life. But we're talking about that with and through, really more importantly, effective treatment. I want to be clear about that. But, I just love this concept and an important piece for us to recognize that, like, you guys, every single one of you has the power for your anxiety and OCD to not control you. And when somebody asks me, which I get this question a lot, well, like, what was the switch, or how do I do it, or what does it look like, or, you know, Liz, how do I start feeling ready for these exposures, and like how are you willing to do them? And my answer is usually pretty simple. Like, I wish I had this like wonderful poetic answer, but my answer is like, you just do it. And they're always like, well, I need something more. And I'm like, I wish I could give you something more, but the reality is that you just have to do it. And as you start doing things differently and you behaviorally start totally changing the way you respond or don't respond to your anxiety and OCD, the other stuff happens next. You start to build your confidence. You start to see that this is OCD. You start to have more clarity, but you actually have to change the behavior first. And you have to be able to recognize like those statements that it's too hard. I can't do this. This is too much. What does that even mean? What is too much? What is too hard? Right. And in fact, Kim Quinlan would say, like, you can do hard things. And we're trying to teach you.
You have to say it in the accent, Liz, the accent.
I know I can. But, you know, Denise Egan Stack would say, like, the goal is to get you comfortable being uncomfortable. Right. Like that's the treatment model. Like, and it's so hard because we want to feel comfortable first. Right. We want to feel like it's not going to be really hard before we're willing to do it. But we actually aren't going to have those feelings and that belief and that understanding until we just do it, until we start responding differently behaviorally.
Yeah, it reminds me of the exercise, Liz, that you had our parent education group do that I absolutely loved, where we wrote down the word avoidance and had all of the individuals in the group start really pointing out reasons why they avoided, right? Like, you avoid because you don't want to feel anxious anymore, or you do this compulsion because you want to feel clean. But in reality, the more that you try to feel those things, you're not actually engaging in that action. I think we gave this example of like washing your hands 30 times because you want your hands to be so clean actually leaves your hands dry and cracked, and the opposite starts to take place. And so that argument really resonated with me of, you're already doing hard work. Like,
totally.
Trying to do this impossible thing. We just need to redirect the focus of it.
Yeah. Or like, you know, when it's like, well, I need to protect my kids. And so I can't play with them and I can't be with them because I want to keep them safe and I want to protect them and I don't want to cause harm to them. And it's like, but what's causing more harm? A parent not engaging with their kids, or us trying to protect them from OCD that isn't even real, right? Like and so, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Well,
it's important for us to break those myths.
You sparked so many things in my head. I mean, one presentation I did for my support groups is I said, I can take all of your compulsions and prove to you that you're actually causing the thing you most fear. And everyone's like, no, that's not true. So a client who had social anxiety, I'm like, what is your greatest fear? And they're like, I'm afraid that I'm going to embarrass myself and have no friends. And I was like, it was my teen and young adult group. And I'm like, what are your compulsions and how is it going? And they're like, well, I miss school a lot. I sit in the back. I don't raise my hand and I hide at lunch. What's the outcome? You have no friends, right? The clients that are embarrassed, right? The clients that are perfectionistic with emails and reread things so they don't mess up and don't get fired. I had a member of our group get fired from 2 jobs because he was so slow, because he was reading it. So I kept telling people that the very thing that you're doing is not leading you to your outcome. The other thing I wanted to say based on what you were saying is, Liz, is like, what I also remind clients is that we already have the tools to get better and we use them in other areas of our lives. So first and foremost, there was some point that we didn't give into our OCD and we're living just fine. We give into our OCD and we're miserable. So we have a track record that when we didn't give into OCD, life was great. We give into OCD, it's miserable. And people are like, I can't do those exposures. I'm like, well, on a daily basis, you're doing compulsions. You're changing your lifestyle to feed something. Why not shift it and, change your lifestyle to something that's going to actually have an outcome that's positive and help you move forward? I think for clinicians watching this, sometimes people don't want to have a treatment that might make their clients uncomfortable. I want you to ask, in other areas of our life, when we have growth, it's discomfort, right? So like, if somebody is really, really looking to regain their health and they're trying to quit smoking and quit drinking and get some movement and start to eat food that is, more nutritious, right? That's not going to be fun or easy. Somebody who decides to go back and get an elevated degree, like a master's or a PhD, that is hard. I've been through it, right? So every time we gain something amazing, we've usually had to put some hard work in. Hard work is not bad. It's not scary. And I get really nervous when I see clinicians promising that their treatment can be an easy, soft way to get better from OCD. and saying that it's too hard to do it other ways. Hard is not bad. Challenging is not a bad thing. It is good to sometimes push yourself in areas that you don't think you can, because you gain a strength you wouldn't get otherwise.
And so let's stop for a second and talk about that. And we're not going to go into depth because we're just going to direct you to some places. But you guys can go to IOCDF's YouTube channel and find some of our past webinars. But I want to encourage you to watch the recent ones that we've done on core fears, because a lot of what we're talking about, that difference between functioning versus freedom, is, are we actually getting to the root? Are we doing the hard work to get to the root of what's going on? Or are we just doing surface level ERP that's going to get us to function, right? Are you doing ERP that gets you to that 70% where you're functioning, but the way you understand functioning in the world is, oh, I have to constantly be doing ERP to survive. Every day I do ERP to make it through the day. That is not effective whole treatment for OCD. Although that is what most people do, I want to be very clear that we work and should be addressing the core fears. Why are we even triggered by that doorknob or by that conversation or by that situation? What is even, why? Why is that sticking? Why is that scary? Why is that hard? That's the work you need to really unravel and do, because when you do, then you don't have to feel like you're constantly playing this game of whack-a-mole and doing ERP for these different things that pop up, because you've actually done ERP for what's at the core. And so I always tell people the goal, I can't promise you'll never have a thought. We all have thoughts, weird thoughts, strange thoughts, you name it. But imagine if thoughts didn't become triggers. If right now you are sitting there going, Liz, there are certain thoughts that would never just be a thought to me. They will always be a trigger. That is an indicator, you guys, that you need to do the core fear work, because I can promise you, my sexual intrusive thoughts, my harm thoughts, all my thoughts that used to be the biggest triggers, I can talk about them openly. I can read articles on them, and I am not triggered anymore. I'm actually at a place where, like, I've done all that core fear work. Like, that root has totally been uprooted.
Yeah, I just put in our private chat, so hopefully Brendan will put it public. It was funny because I was actually texting with Michelle Massey last night, and I was telling her that our live stream on Core Fears actually was doing really good playback wise, and I was getting some feedback from people that watched it. And that is the biggest question I think we probably all get asked. One of them is that whack-a-mole question. How come every single time I'm whacking a mole, and what's the point of doing treatment? And what we have said, and we've said it to the point that Liz and I have lost our voice, is like, you got to go deeper. There is something underneath that is driving the whole machine. It is the seed that keeps sprouting. Shoot, I was trying to be like Allegra last night with my farm analogies, and I'm not a planter. But basically my point is, like, there's something underneath that consistently has us on edge. And if we can address that core fear, what's underneath, that is going to have us be better. I know my core fear was health stuff. I mean, I had other ones, but my main one was health stuff. Everything was around keeping myself healthy, because I saw family members really get sick and lose that. And I started to just assume everything I was doing was health. But if I only focused on avoiding chemicals at the grocery store, or when my grandma was spraying bug spray, I would whack-a-mole every time there was a new chemical around me. And there's a lot of brands, right? But when I realized what was going on underneath, I did not feel like I could trust doctors. I couldn't trust my ability to know when I was in some kind of health pain or not. So I was constantly doing compulsions, thinking it was eventually going to get me in the clear. So when I addressed that versus the bug spray, or, you know, how many times I showered, it was way more effective, and things didn't keep popping up like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, I'm still laughing because at one point, Chris, you said whacking a mole, and I just thought that was the funniest thing.
Just making up
I've
stuff.
only heard whack-a-mole before, but I was telling Liz the other day that same thing, to echo what she was saying about how, yeah, I can talk about sexual intrusive thoughts, harm intrusive thoughts. None of that bothers me anymore. But if I sat here for 2 hours and let myself, like, really tried to dig in and think about a scary thought that I used to have, I bet I could make myself get triggered. I bet I could. But why would I do that? Now I have so much more control over that ability to choose not to go there than I ever did. And that's because I had to work really hard to get to that place. Right.
Right. But at the same time, Callie, what I'm going to push you is that I bet if you heard surface things about those fears, it wouldn't be triggering.
Right.
Because, you know, it's twofold. It's like, yeah, you don't necessarily need to spend 2 hours trying to make ourselves as triggered as possible. But at the same time, if we know that we're avoiding scrolling Instagram or watching the news or doing this thing because we don't want to potentially hear about this one thing that would trigger us, that's where it's like, that's work I need to do. This is something that, like, why would you go torture yourself?
Right. Well, and that would be a compulsion is what I'm saying, is like, if I sat there and just like made myself think, like I would be compulsing over and over. Right. And I don't have to, it's so much easier for me not to do that now than it would have been before, which was so tempting and nerve wracking. And so there's a lot of power.
Totally. Love it. Okay. We're going to go to questions. So many great comments. You guys are saying wonderful things. I love it so much. I always take notes and I'm typing while we're going through it. But I'm going to start with Anna's question at 12:25 your time, Brendan. I'm going to throw this to Chris first. She says, it's very hard to treat your child with OCD as a child without OCD when your child's OCD triggers are in the house and next to parents. Parents can't communicate and can't say anything. Chris, I want you to take this just because we hear this so much where there are parents that feel like they have to shelter what they say. And it's easy for us to say, you don't have to do that. But then you're going, yeah, but like, how do we live our life?
Yeah, my first thought, Anna, would be you've got to create a strategy. I think a lot of times parents are either trying to address things in the moment or they're trying to do it on their own. Sometimes parents forget that you can also see an OCD clinician. There's some clients that I work with that I've never met their person in their life with OCD, but they're coming to learn how to better support in a helpful way their loved one with OCD. So I would suggest that if your child with OCD has a therapist, or even if they don't, is utilizing a couple treatment sessions to really kind of create what is the best way to start to make a shift in the household. We always remind, sometimes parents get so eager when they find out they shouldn't be reassuring or accommodating, and they try to take everything away at once, and it just causes too much of a like pull the rug from under you effect, right? So Anna, that's not what we're asking. We're saying, let's look at how you could systematically, collaboratively, and slowly pull back with a trained professional. And then lastly, what I'll say, I'm not going to take credit for it, but we had an event at OCD SoCal, and there's a therapist out here. I call her by her first name, so I can't remember her last name off the top. It's Jennifer. It'll come to me at the middle of the night. But we were doing a panel, and she said to one of the parents, is like, how much of a gift can you give your child? So I'll say this to you, Anna, like, what a gift it would be to look at your child and say, I trust that you can handle the words that we talk about, and I trust that you can handle this. By actually pulling back on accommodations and pulling back on reassurance, you're telling your child, I trust you, I trust your strength, and I think this is something you can get through. We have to teach our loved ones that they can handle it, and you can do it in a systematic way so it's not overwhelming.
Yeah. And so I want us to put up, there is a treatment protocol called the SPACE treatment. It's all caps SPACE. It's by Ellie Leibowitz. And it's an incredible protocol, Anna, that I would recommend that is specific for parents with anxious children. And it actually, you do it with a provider so that together you guys can walk through how to not accommodate, how to set those boundaries. But you're right. Like, I think us saying, this is where I'm like, at the beginning, our disclaimer, we're not your treatment provider, is we're giving general concepts that you should go back and think about with your treatment team about how to implement that. But we really actually don't want you tiptoeing. We don't want you sheltering conversations because you're worried someone's going to be triggered. Because again, if we do that, the message we're unintentionally sending is you can't handle being triggered. You can't handle being anxious. And so it's really important for us to be thoughtful of that, but I'd recommend you do it together. So please consider looking into SPACE treatment. When you go to the SPACE website, you're able to click search your area to see who are the certified SPACE trainers or trained SPACE providers local to you. But it is for anyone with kids struggling with anxiety. It is a wonderful treatment process to do. At 11:27 from Don, Callie, I'll have you take this one. What do you recommend for dealing with severe health and death anxiety? I feel like every time I turn around, I hear about somebody else getting cancer and it puts me in a panic mode.
Yeah, I'll say two things about this. One, your anxiety has latched onto health and death, right? And so you are going to notice so many more things tied to it, kind of like the old slug bug game, right? If you're looking for license plate with certain colors or slug bugs so that you can tap someone with that type of car, you're going to see them so much more. And so when you're on high alert, that trigger is going to be very noticeable. But then two, let's go back to that radical acceptance piece. Like if you're spending this time wondering or worrying about cancer, are you any more or less likely to prevent this? The only thing that you're doing is taking yourself out of the present life more and being able to enjoy your present life. And so being able to radically accept that I don't have control over this will give you more insight into the fact later that you don't have to have control, right? That you can surrender and let some distress tolerance build so that you feel less alert to all of those things. And so we all live with that uncertainty each and every day. And it's unfortunate when anxiety latches on to something that we don't want it to, but you can obtain that uncertainty and still feel confident anyways.
Love it.
Well said.
Yes, couldn't add more. Chris, can TT for Brennan for you at 12:35 Eastern time. Some OCD comes with a GAD disorder that can't be controlled by therapy or CBT ways without any meds. So can you talk a little bit just about how medication and therapy are often combined and how treatment might be different for somebody dealing with a comorbid diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we want to recognize is that for most people, the gold standard would be obviously to do CBT or ERP, and then adjunct medication if it's needed. So a lot of times if somebody's just experiencing consistent anxiety, despite doing the treatment or reducing their compulsions or whatever it may be, if they're feeling extreme anxiety consistently, what a medication's goal is, I always tell people it gives you kind of a ceiling and a floor. So, when we have OCD and anxiety disorders, our anxiety, our emotional regulation can feel off when we're triggered. But with medication, sometimes we get a roof, so our anxiety isn't as high, and a floor, so we don't fall out and have like deep depression. So with medication, that's going to kind of help that give you kind of like a consistent experience that your anxiety isn't dominating on a consistent basis, which then will help people do the treatment and make certain cognitive and behavioral changes. Now, a lot of people with OCD, I would say most, don't just come without OCD or just with OCD alone. I think the DSM talks about almost 70%, upwards of 70% of individuals with OCD will have some anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder could be social anxiety disorder, which we call social phobia. And so generalized anxiety disorder and OCD, a lot of people have both. Now it is different, with OCD, that's the big key is we're going to have obsessions and we're going to feel like we have to do compulsions in order to prevent whatever that obsession is saying. Generalized anxiety disorders often worry and fear around situations that I would argue most people see as normal. So it could be public speaking or having some anxiety and driving in the rain, but there may not be this consistent obsessional thinking throughout the day, and the compulsions may not be as overt. And typically people with OCD's fears are less likely to happen, whereas somebody with generalized anxiety may flub up if they're speaking in front of a group. So when you ask, if there's anxiety that can't be controlled by therapy or without medication, I would argue combining treatment and medication works for most people. And there's a lot of adjunct therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and others that could be used in assistance with ERP. So what I always say to people when they're like, I just am treatment resistant and medication resistant, make sure you're seeing a specialist that does this for a consistent living and basis, because often they can come up with strategies that can absolutely assist you when you feel stuck.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Next question from Spence Robert at 11:51 your time, Brennan. You guys, Brennan is behind the scenes. He pulls all these questions for us, and he's in Eastern time zone. So Chris and I always like doing math. I know 1 hour difference shouldn't be math, but it is for me. So
for me, it's 3. It's tough.
Yeah, it's really tough for Chris. So Spence Robert said, if I fear my thoughts no longer control my actions, which could undergird a medley of self-harm and other themes, could that be useful as an identified core fear? Chris, you want to take this on since you had already read that one?
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. This is what we were talking about earlier. Like if your obsession is like, hey, I no longer, my thoughts no longer control my actions, I'm going to end up losing control of my actions and have one of those outcomes, either self-harm or other harm fears, fears, that's going to be your core fear, right? This idea of like, what if I just lose control and end up kind of harming myself or others? So then the compulsions seem like they're a valid thing that any sane person would do. I don't want to become somebody that just harms other people. That's not who I want to become. So I'll do whatever compulsion to stop it. That's my responsibility. And that's the way that OCD markets the compulsions to you to feel important. So Spence, what we would work on you with is to identify, like, first and foremost, how did you come to that belief system that you could ever think that, you are somebody that could just lose control and harm others? Typically, there's no evidence that that's the kind of person you are. How did OCD bamboozle you? And then further, how on a daily basis is either your mindset or your physical or mental compulsions reinforcing that? So you may have a surface fear, such as like, I don't want to drink caffeine because I don't feel as in control when I drink caffeine, or I need to get 8 hours of sleep because if I'm tired, I'm less likely to be in control. But if you're only focusing that with a therapist, new things will pop up throughout your lifespan that will add to that fear. If you address the core fear of losing self-control, that's going to prevent any of these little sprouts to pop up.
Totally. Okay, next question is Kate at 1244. Weird question, but is it okay to view my own sexual orientation as a choice for sexual orientation OCD? It makes me feel more in control and comforted. Callie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I might miss the mark with this because I think what you're asking, Kate, is it okay for me to just point out that this is my OCD when it comes to this specific trigger? And to some
or maybe even like, yeah, like I'm worried that for me, right? Like y'all know I'm straight, married. I might be like, oh, I'm having a thought that I'm gay, but like I have like chose to be straight, and this is like what about like leaving that ambiguity around the fact that this is a choice that I'm making? Like, is that a part of ERP? I'm wondering too if that could be.
Yeah. And so I think what we want to remember is that like it's helpful to be able to identify, oh, all that stuff was my OCD. I think in the moment, if you're really stuck in that compulsion, it's really hard to identify that, well, this is probably my OCD, or this is definitely my OCD, because the brain goes back to that what if game. What if it's not, right? And then you find yourself playing whack-a-mole and it can become debilitating. And so I like to say it's probably, if you're triggered in the moment, better to just lean into the, you know what, I don't know for certain if it's my OCD, but I'm going to lean into my values. And today, this is what I'm doing today. And I have this on my schedule, and I'm going to be as present as possible, because you will, if you let go of trying to determine if this is absolutely my OCD, you will get to a place where you can point out that was all my OCD. And so if that doesn't answer the question, put another comment in, or Liz and Chris, feel free to jump in too.
Well, I'll just add, as somebody who is gay, I mean, for me, I know deep. I mean, it shouldn't be even something that we argue anymore. Like, it isn't a choice, right? But when you have OCD, that's not what we're trying to do. I think that's the mistake with sexual orientation. Is there's this need to like pinpoint and figure it out. And then the problem is, because it's not even real in the first place, you go to the gym and you see an attractive person. Oh my, I must be gay, right? Et cetera. And the OCD wants you to fit into compartments. So like Callie was saying, Kate, it's like, you don't need to have conversations with your OCD anymore. Just like in real life, you leave people on red, or you kind of do the whole like, that's crazy. I'm going to go grab my friend for a second. I'll be back. And then never show up. Why can't you do that with OCD? Why can't we use the same tools we have in real life when we don't want to address something, or we don't want to go back and forth with someone? Let's start doing it to our brain. So yeah, Kate, if OCD is like, oh, X, Y, and Z, you're like, I'm just choosing to be gay or straight or whatever, and I don't really care. I mean, it's really just giving that mindset of like, I don't need to have a whole conversation with OCD, just like I wouldn't do it with someone I don't like in real life.
Well said.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that sometimes you can point out, like Callie said, this is OCD, like this is my OCD, and this is what I know, and I'm going to move forward with that in my life, right? Versus trying to, well, I don't know, maybe, right? It's, again, are you trying to achieve certainty, or trying to solve that doubt and that question that OCD throws at you? Or are you allowing space for the unknown as OCD, but still moving forward with the decisions and choices and that you might make in your life, or the person that you are and you know deep down, right? If we're talking sexual orientation OCD, like Chris said, like it's not a choice, right? That's who you are, and you know that deep down. But then OCD makes you think, wait a second, is that a choice? Is that right? It's throwing the doubt. And so the more we're actually answering the doubt, the more stuck we get. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
Same for lots of other, you could look at contamination and all these other ones too, right? Last question before we wrap up from Cheryl at 1248. My son is resisting intense treatment that he desperately needs. He's stuck home due to contamination. He can't prepare food himself or touch doorknobs. We enable him too much. He seems to think nothing will help. How do we get him more involved with his own treatment? Great question.
I'm going to echo space again, I think would be a really great choice, just because it's about what the behaviors are that the parents can do differently that almost really push an individual into the corner of having to make different choices, especially if he's not bought into treatment. I will say, if someone's doing or asked to do OCD work and they're not bought into treatment or not willing to lean in or feel uncomfortable, they're not going to get very far. They have to build that motivation. And maybe that motivation comes from parents changing some of the ways that they respond to the OCD first.
Yeah, Cheryl, what I want to add too is like, it is okay for you to see an OCD therapist and just really learn a little bit more about the disorder and how maybe the house system is reinforcing it. I know the other thing is figure out how your child likes to intake their information. So for instance, like, is your son a podcast person? Do they like YouTube? Is there something that you can give them from the IOCDF or from somebody that, you know, is a trusted source that he'll be open to listening to and learn from? And then lastly, it is always powerful if he can hear success stories from other people with OCD to know that there are things that help. I mean, the great news about OCD treatment is it's highly effective. I think everybody just assumes every disorder's treatment is highly effective, and it's not always that way, you know? So with OCD treatment, it is very effective. So maybe if he hears, Liz has a bunch of stories up, Callie does as well. Like, if you can hear success stories, he might get a little bit more confidence. And then lastly, Cheryl, I'm not sure if you attend, but my mom and I run a free family and loved ones OCD support group every second Saturday of the month. If you email info@ocdsocal.org, you can get on the mail list. Liz has been on it. Callie, I need to get you on it. And, you know, it's a great place for parents just to get support and learn a little bit more. But like I said, you know, you want to figure out what's the best way for your son to see that there's hope. You have 3 of us living proof on here.
That's right. That's right. And it's hard, but as a parent, you have to set these boundaries that are hard and scary. And then as a child, we try to get them to the right help. And sometimes there's comorbidities and other things going on that we need to be thinking about that might be interfering with someone's ability to engage in treatment and get the results that they deserve from ERP. Today has been amazing, and I'll do the first wrap up and then hand it over to Callie and then you, Chris. But what I'll say is language and perspective is everything in so many ways, right? We know that we need effective treatment, and I want us to believe and to know that we don't have to accept that 30% as a reality forever. And instead, that 30% can become 0, and you can live a life with full freedom from OCD. There are so many people that are living proof. And I say this because I'm someone who didn't believe that for a really long time, and I didn't know that was possible. But that kind of model of treatment, living my life, unfiltered life, not a shallow life for OCD, but fully living my life, and then finally getting and doing that remaining work to get to that final 30% has been life-changing for me and has totally shifted my perspective and understanding of caring or having an OCD diagnosis. Callie?
Yeah, and I will just echo that for a long time I pretended that I could accept full freedom from OCD. And it wasn't until that leap of really letting go of some of the certainty that I was still holding on to that I saw that it could absolutely be possible. And I want to do advocacy that much more now, because I can be excited about it, right? I can actually fully embrace the fact that OCD doesn't have to bother me every day, and that I can live a life fully in control and fully tolerating of uncertainty. And sometimes uncertainty can be really exciting, and I didn't know what that was like before, right? And so that would be my going piece is, can you imagine a life where uncertainty is exciting, of not knowing what turn or page turns next? And if so, you absolutely should go for it.
Yeah, and I'll just finally say, I mean, I know a lot of Liz's story. I don't know as much of your story, Callie, but I mean, Liz and I, and I'm assuming Callie as well, I mean, we've had extremely low moments, and those low moments have lasted for years. And for all three of us to be successful and to really embrace life, I always joke, like, you know, the rising cost of my green teas at Starbucks now cause more distress on a daily basis than OCD. Like, that's what you'll get to. You'll get to a point that, like, that kind of stuff bothers you more than OCD. So you can get there. You just got to put in the hard work, but you learn as you put in the hard work and you grow. Lastly, I want to shout out Stacey H. She gave some advice in the chat about, you know, really helping her, how she got better, helped herself get information for her kid, and shouted out us Facebook support group. So I always love seeing people in the chat being engaging and supporting each other. But thanks y'all for coming out. Liz, do you want to sign us off?
Love you guys. Love this community. It's the world's best. I really believe that. We won't see you for 2 weeks because next week is Research Roundtable, but we'll be back right after President's Day. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Valentine's Day and feel all the love that we are sending to you and that your community is, because this community is full of it. And yeah, make sure you're thinking about the conference, considering going and looking into it now. It is in July this year in Florida.
Yeah. And thanks for hanging with us, Callie.
Yes. Thanks, Callie. Loved having you.
Guys.
Bye.
Now there's 2 people that look better than me on the stream. Thanks a lot.